The thing that is designed to protect you from getting hurt is often the exact same thing that creates the outcome that you were most afraid of. Because you cannot connect with someone when you are simultaneously running threat assessments on them. I want you to think about the last time someone was consistently good to you. Like, no games, no hot and cold, no making you guess, just steady, present, and ready for your love. And I want you to be honest about how that made you feel. Or if you've never had that, imagine what that would feel like. Because if your answer is anything other than safe and grateful, if it was instead like boring or suspicious or something was off, or you're waiting for the other shoe to drop or the catch, or you just, something is wrong and you're just wondering when you'll find out, then this video is hopefully going to change something within you. Because what I'm about to tell you is that what you have been calling a lack of chemistry for your entire life is actually the absence of chaos. And the thing that you may have been calling boring is actually safety in relationships. And because you have been so royally starved of that safety and healthy love, that you have stopped recognizing it as something that you deserve. And if you watched my last video on incompatibility, you'll know we talked a lot about having standards for someone, how to enforce said standards, how to evaluate someone clearly, and how to basically become the person that got away. And I got so many messages after that video from women being like, okay, I get it, I understand the why, but how? How do I end up doing this? Why do I keep ending up here? Why is this my pattern? Why does it always feel like I'm dating the same person in like a slightly new, variated kind of font? And asking yourselves these types of questions is probably the most important thing you can ever do for your growth in relationships and dating. Because information alone does not break patterns. Like, you can watch every video, read every book, know every green and red flag by heart, and still find yourself 3 months into the exact same dynamic you swore that you were done with. And that is not because you are a slow learner or deserving of it or incapable of change. It is because the pattern that you keep living is not only in your head, but it is also in your body too. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. And I am nothing if not organized, so we will be breaking today's video down into seven parts. Part 1, what your unhealed parts in dating are actually telling you about yourself. Part 2, why you are subconsciously drawn to what is familiar rather than what is actually good for you. Part 3, why women who have had to earn love their whole life feel violently suspicious of it. Part 4, how hypervigilance keeps you safe, but it also keeps you alone. Part 5, why the nervous system interprets healthy love as boring. Part 6, what it actually feels like to let someone in without self-destructing. And Part 7, how to actually sit with being chosen without automatically looking for like the catch. And if at any point one of these parts is your like aha moment, then comment it, because I read all of them, because the channel is still very intimate and, quaint, shall I say. So I read all of them and I will reply to every single one of the comments. So just leave it, because then I know that I'm like intimately connecting with you as like an individual, It's great. And before I get into like the heart of the video, I just kind of want to tie into something quickly. Also, the lighting is going to keep changing because it's sunset. I left this to the last minute to film. So we'll just rolling with the punches today. But yes, I just wanted to get into something really quickly because it has been the one thing that has kind of helped me kind of wrap my head around this concept. And it has been a really big part of how I've been able to understand like my own patterns. And I think it would be a disservice to you not to mention it. Like, one of the things that has genuinely helped me make sense of all of this and dating and love and receiving love in general is my faith. And I know that word can make some of you want to like kind of click off this video immediately, and I can appreciate that. And like, I am not here to preach at you or like make you feel like you have to kind of fit into a certain thing to get value out of this video. It's going to be helpful regardless. But what I will say is that the Bible does have some pretty insightful wisdom on how we heal, how we love, how we kind of interact with other people romantically. And I think even if you aren't religious or you aren't sure like where you stand with all of that, I think there is still some insight and wisdom to be extracted from the book. So I am going to weave it in today because it has helped me a lot and I think it would help you too. And if nothing else, it just gives you some really good foundational instructions of how to be a good human being. Okay, so part 1. What are your patterns in dating and what is that actually telling you about the unhealed wounds still within you? So I wanted to start here because this is the part that people really typically enjoy ignoring for the entirety of their lives, basically. Like, we love to talk about patterns in this very like surface level kind of labeling format. I always go for emotionally unavailable men. Oh, I always end up being the one who like cares more. Oh, I always attract people who need saving. But we rarely, if ever, stop and ask like, okay, sure, but like, what is this actually telling me about me? Because this is the thing, your patterns in romantic and dating are not actually random. They are not bad luck, they're not like God or the universe being cruel to you specifically. Your patterns are a map, a very detailed, clear outline of the parts of you that got hurt a very long time ago and have never healed since. There is a verse in Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23, and it says, above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Because the patterns that you keep repeating are a heart issue, okay, not just a behavioral one. What is unhealed in you will keep flowing outwardly into your choices until you come back and deal with it at the source, at the root of the problem. Like, you cannot just intellectually decide to do better. You actually have to go back and deal with what is underneath. And I am referencing a lot of attachment theory, so I will be putting all of my little references and whatever in the description. If you're wondering whether I get like the psychological academic grounding of this whole video, it'll be in the description. But I see this all the time. I see women asking like, oh, but like, why do I always end up with men who are inconsistent? You know, they're hot, they're cold, they pull me in, they push me away. Like, why am I still engaging in this dynamic? Like, I know it's bad for me, but I just cannot seem to stop going back. And like, obviously the response from the general female community is always like, you know, he's a narcissist, like you deserve better, like leave him. And all of those things are true, but nobody asks the more important question, which is this: why does the hot and cold feel so familiar to you? Why does the push and pull feel like home to you? Because for a lot of women, that inconsistency is not new. It is a replica of something they have experienced before. Maybe it was a parent who was sometimes warm and sometimes completely checked out. Maybe it was a childhood where love felt conditional, where you had to perform or achieve or be a certain way to get affection or attention, or you had to initiate affection first. Maybe it was an environment where things were really unpredictable and you didn't quite know what version of home you were coming home to. And so now, as an adult, when you meet someone who is genuinely consistent and healthy, your nervous system does not recognize it as love. But when you meet someone who is unpredictable, who gives you just enough to keep you hooked, that is what feels like love. Because that is what love felt like when you first learnt what love is. And I think the most confronting thing I can say to you in all of this is that you are not attracting these people by accident. You are attracting them because some part of you is still trying to win a game that you lost a really long time ago. You are still trying to get the inconsistent person to choose you consistently. Because if you can just get this person to say, that means back then it wasn't about you and that you were always worthy of consistent love. You just didn't get it. And I want you to kind of sit with that for a second, because that is not a small thing to kind of realize. But the sooner that you accept that you didn't get what you needed as a kid, the sooner you can decide that you're going to fill that void within you yourself. And this flows very naturally into part 2, which is why you are subconsciously drawn to what feels familiar, even when it is quite painful. This is where it gets very interesting and also more uncomfortable. It'll get more uncomfortable as we continue throughout the video, just as a brief trigger warning, I guess. But there is a concept in psychology called repetition compulsion. And what it basically means is that we are subconsciously drawn to recreate the same dynamics from our childhood. Not because we are masochists, not because we enjoy our own pain, but because the subconscious brain is always trying to finish unfinished business. It's trying to solve it. It is like your inner child. It's like the world's most stubborn private investigator, and it just keeps reopening that case again and again, and it just cannot accept that there is no, rational explanation for what happened. It's saying, we are not done here, like we're gonna fix this, we're gonna put all our resources into this cold, dead case. And Romans chapter 12 verse 2 talks about this in a way that I think is super relevant, and it says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think about that a lot, because the familiar patterns, they feel like home, okay, but they are not God's design for your life and how he wants you to be loved. And transformation is not just what you do on the outside. It's about like the changing of your mind from like the inside out. And that is genuinely very hard, very slow work, but it also is the only work that actually changes anything like long term. And the way this plays out in dating is so specific that when I say it, you're both going to feel very seen and very like called out at the same time. So sorry. So I have seen women describe their type, and they will say things like, I always go for like the brooding, like tough exterior, hard to read type of guy. Or like, I always fall for like the really successful guy who's just like emotionally really unavailable. Or like, I always end up being the emotional support for a man who ends up leaving them for someone they actually let in. And what all of those little variations all have in common is that they're all slightly different stories of a man that is not fully available. Someone who requires you to work for their love in some way. Someone who keeps you emotionally quite hungry. And there's a really good metaphor I want you to kind of dwell in. But it is like being raised in a house where the heating only works sometimes. Some days it is warm, some days it is freezing, and you never quite know which temperature you're walking into. And so you become incredibly skilled at reading the temperature of the room, at sensing someone changing the dials before it happened, at managing the sudden cold. And then, you grow up, you move out, you maybe move into a house where someone is offering you consistent, healthy warmth all year round. And instead of feeling very relieved, okay, you feel unsettled because you do not know how to exist in a house where everything works without you having to do anything. And the comfort that you are experiencing feels quite suspicious. And it feels like that warmth might get taken away at any moment. And then also the cold, when it eventually does end up showing, sometimes from other areas of your life, feels like a cool relief. Like, okay, here we go. I know how to do this. Like this is familiar. Like, let's bring it on. And so you can see from that example how your brain starts to crave the chaos because your brain at its core does want to feel at home. So sometimes when people say like, oh, you crave the chaos, that's what that actually means. Your brain will try to find it in other places to make it feel more settled. Like it knows what's going to happen next. So it feels that sort of like false safety, false security, just in the predictability of a toxic environment. And that is what it feels like to be drawn to painful dynamics. It is not that you want pain. It is that pain is the language that your nervous system grew up speaking. And unlearning a language you have spoken your entire life is genuinely really hard. And this flows into part 3. Why women who have had to earn love their whole life feel very suspicious of love that comes easily. This is the one that I think is probably the most kind of looked over part of dating conversations, because we spend so much time trying to identify the wrong person. But no one really talks about what happens when the right person shows up and you just cannot settle your little monkey brain. And I see this play out in such specific ways. Like there will be a woman who knows her worth, who's done so much self-reflection, emotional and mature. She has her life together, she's very clear on what she wants. And then when someone genuinely good shows up, someone who texts her back consistently, someone who makes plans and follows through, someone who is just very steady. Instead of feeling happy, she feels really uncomfortable. And then, of course, she starts doing things like looking for the catch, going through his social media to find out that he secretly is terrible. Like pulling back right when things start to go well, creating distance without even really knowing why, telling her friends, I don't know, he seems great, but something's off. When in reality, nothing actually is off. And I actually saw a post recently where a woman wrote, I've been seeing this guy for 2 months. He's really consistent. He's kind, communicative, everything that I said that I wanted. But I don't feel anything. I feel bored. And she was like, is it a red flag that I'm not anxious about him? And I just thought to myself, I was like, that is the most heartbreaking thing I think I've ever heard. Because she has been so conditioned by painful, unhealthy, anxious love that her brain doesn't even recognize healthy love anymore. It does not even register to her as a possibility. It just registers as boring. And this is where I want to bring in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 4-8. Because I think thinking about this verse is probably one of the most useful things you can do if you are kind of stuck in this dynamic. So just let's sit with this together. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It keeps no records of wrongdoings. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. It never fails. And I kind of just want you to go through that mentally very slowly and put every relationship you've ever been in against that kind of set of instructions. Because a lot of women have never actually been loved like this. And what is so confronting is that if you have never been loved like this, you do not even know that it is what you're supposed to be looking for. So when someone does show up, shows you kindness, patience, keeps no record of wrongdoings, your nervous system does not go oh, finally. It goes, oh, what is wrong with this person? Because it does not match the template that you were given as a child for what love is. And 1 John chapter 4, verse 18 says that there is no fear in love. That perfect love actually drives out fear. And when I first read that, I was like, oh, because if love is supposed to drive out fear, and what you have been doing is walking on eggshells and being anxious and constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, then maybe what you are in is not love. It is something else wearing love's clothes. And that distinction was so eye-opening for me personally. I felt really called out. And the reason why real love that arrives freely feels so difficult to accept is actually really simple, even though it doesn't feel simple at all. But when you have spent your entire life trying to earn love, having to be, good enough, helpful enough, impressive enough, small enough, easy enough to love, that love that arrives without any conditions kind of feels like some sort of trick. Because in your experience, love has always had some sort of cost attached to it. And when something that used to cost everything to you is suddenly free, your brain goes, what? Read the fine print. There has to be some sort of cryptic catch happening. And so what you do is you push, you test, you pull back, you convince yourself he's not that interesting. You create just enough chaos to make the dynamic feel familiar again. And then, the testing, the pushing back, the constantly looking for the exit is what actually ends up ruining it. And then after all this, when it eventually does fall apart, you can go, oh, see, I told you, he didn't actually love me. But if you were being honest with yourself, it was you who actually pulled it all apart. You were the one who made it impossible for a healthy person to want to stay. And that is such a hard thing to sit with, but it is very important to look at. And here is also the other thing, because we just went through that whole passage together about what love is. You know, love is patient, love is kind, not easily angered, keeps no records of wrongdoings. What I want to now do is gently ask you, were you being that? Like in the relationships where you were testing, pushing back, you know, constantly seeing where their faults are, you know, scanning for evidence and waiting for them to mess up. Were you showing up as patient, kind, slow to anger? Were you being the embodiment of what love should be? Because incompatibility and self-sabotage can look very similar from the outside. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is actually look at your side of the dynamic before deciding that it was entirely someone else's fault. And then this goes into part 4. How hypervigilance in dating keeps you safe, but it keeps you alone. Okay, so hypervigilance. I really want to talk about this because sometimes it gets confused with having standards, and it is really, really not the same thing. So what hypervigilance in dating actually looks like is this. You are on a first date and, you know, everything is going well. And then he says like, oh, I've just been really busy. You know, like slightly ambiguous. And instead of just taking that as face value, as something he has shared as a bonding moment between the two of you, your brain immediately goes, okay, but what does this mean? Is he telling me that he isn't going to have time for a relationship? Is he already pulling away? Should I pull away first? Is this a red flag? Should I bring it up, or will that seem crazy? Let me actually go back and exactly analyze the tone he said it in. And now you have all of a sudden spent the rest of the day analyzing this one thing that he said instead of just being present with the man that's in front of you. Or it also looks like going back and reading through all your previous texts and looking for any like inconsistencies. Or like Googling his name and trying to see if there's anything that you missed. Maybe he's a criminal. Or asking your friends to keep tabs on all of his Instagram likes to see if he's somehow talking to other women. And I say all of this without judgment because I think the women who do this know on some level that it is a bit much. But they cannot stop because hypervigilance is not coming from logic. It is coming from a nervous system that learned a very long time ago that staying safe meant staying alert. That the moment that you relax, something is going to go wrong. And so you were always scanning, always watching, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. In Psalm chapter 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." And I think about this in the context of hypervigilance a lot because that kind of stillness, you know, that genuine groundedness is essentially the opposite of what hypervigilance feels like. It is the belief that you do not have to constantly be on guard in order to feel safe within yourself. That there is a version of safety that comes from surrender, not control. That God already sees you and has got this covered if you just have faith. Don't try to control the outcome. But you can slow down and just tell yourself, you know what? We don't need to be doing all of this. Because regardless of what happens, I know that I will be okay because I have always been okay. I'm still here. I'm still alive. So there's no need to control the outcome. And I know that that is a really hard thing to receive when your entire nervous system has been kind of wired for this paranoia. But I really do believe that that is where healing lives. And here is the painful irony about hypervigilance. The thing that is designed to protect you from getting hurt is often the exact same thing that creates the outcome that you were most afraid of. Because you cannot connect with someone when you are simultaneously running threat assessments on them. You cannot be warm and open and present while you are also simultaneously guarded and scanning and waiting for them to mess up. And so the person on the other side of that dynamic feels like they are being auditioned, not dated. And eventually they end up leaving, and that reinforces the belief that you have in your head all over again. And now we'll get into part 5. Why the nervous system interprets healthy love as boring or as something being wrong. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but I kind of want to go deeper because this is something that really trips up women and they sort of don't even realize that it's happening. Your nervous system is not rational. Like, it does not care what is good for you in like a logical sense. What it cares about is what is familiar. And if your baseline growing up was stress, unpredictability, emotional hunger, having to work for love, then that is what your nervous system calibrated as normal. That is its sort of resting state. And so when something comes along that is then the opposite of that, it does not feel like relief. It feels like there is something missing. And the analogy that I always kind of think of is, imagine you have been wearing shoes that are too small for your entire life. Instead of feeling comfortable, they feel like really weird. You know, they're like too loose. You know, you keep checking that you're still wearing them because they're not like gripping you in the way that you're used to. And you sort of almost miss the pinching because at least when they were pinching you, you could tell that they were on. And that is what it feels like to date someone healthy when you are used to dating people that hurt you. The ease feels really suspicious. The consistency feels like a lack of passion. And the lack of drama feels like a lack of chemistry. And so you tell yourself, like, I just don't feel it with him. There's no spark. He's a great guy, but it's just not there. When in reality, what is not actually there is anxiety. What is not there is obsession. What is not there is the constant emotional hunger that you got so used to experiencing that you forgot that it was dysfunctional. And you started to mistake it for affection. And one of the verses that really ties into this is Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. And it says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I think about that verse a lot when we think about the chaos that we mistake for love. Like, if something is consistently harming you, it is really worth asking yourself, is this actually aligned with the life that I'm meant for? Because God's design for love was never walking on eggshells, never being like consciously anxious or feeling like, you were slowly losing pieces of yourself. And what you are calling a spark is very often just cortisol. It is your stress response. It is your body going into high alert around someone who is activating your old wounds. Your body is being flooded with cortisol as a warning system that you are not safe with this person, okay? That is not your opportunity to label them as your soulmate, okay? That is not the signal that you are looking for. And what you are calling boring is very just often safety. And you just have never been safe enough in love to actually know what that feels like. And that naturally ties into part 6. What it actually feels like to let someone in without self-destructing. Okay, so I want to be very honest here because I think this part is usually packaged as this, very soft, very beautiful depiction that does not actually compare to how hard it is. Because letting someone in when your whole nervous system is designed to keep people out is not this like gentle, like peaceful unfolding. Like, it is uncomfortable. It is vulnerable in a way that is almost physical. It is staying open when every instinct in your body is asking you to close, push them away. And this is what it looks like in practice. It looks like someone doing something really nice for you, and instead of, deflecting or minimizing or making a joke out of it, you just gracefully accept it. You just say like, oh, thank you, and you just let yourself feel it. Like genuinely fighting your brain and saying to yourself, like, this is really nice and I don't need to pay them back or like give them something in return. Which sounds so simple, but it is somehow also at the same time the hardest thing in the world to do when you are so not used to receiving, without having to earn it. It also is like resisting the urge to create distance when someone feels too close to you. Like noticing the moment when you want to like pick a fight or find something wrong with him or suddenly remember all the reasons why it might not work and choosing to stay anyway. Not because you are naive, but because you recognize that impulse for what it is, which is fear wearing the little costume of discernment. And that is a really important distinction to make because I don't want you to hear all of this and think that I'm telling you to override your instincts. Because there is a really big difference between genuine evidence of someone and your anxious thoughts kind of making a story up about them. Like if he has actually done something that does not sit right with you, if there is like real behavior, real words, real actions, real patterns, that is actual information and you are in fact allowed to use it. You are allowed to take that seriously. That is your discernment working properly. But if nothing has actually happened, if he has been nothing but kind and consistent, and this is just your brain, spinning up the worst case scenarios and like imagine conversations and like, what if he does this? What if this happens? Then that is not your discernment. That is your anxiety creating a story and then asking you to make a decision based on it. And that is the thing that you have to catch yourself doing. Because imaginary scenes are not evidence. Invented scenarios in your head are not valid data points. And you cannot build something real with someone if you are constantly responding to a version of them in your head that does not actually exist. Only let actual reality inform your choices. Not the one your fear constructed at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. Again, that is your brain craving the chaos and thus creating it. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 7 says actually something really good about this. It says that love always protects, always hopes, always trusts, always perseveres. And I think that is such a useful thing to come back to because that is what love is supposed to actually feel like. Not perfect, not without its hard moments, but fundamentally safe, fundamentally oriented towards you. And if the version of love that you have been accepting doesn't look like this, then you are not actually experiencing love. You have been experiencing something else like deep attachment and wounds and calling it love. And that is a very important and uncomfortable distinction to make. And what it actually feels like on the other side, like if you get over this, of letting someone actually in, is that it is much quieter than you imagine. Like there is no dramatic moment where everything is all of a sudden, beautiful and fantastical and you get some sort of like award to show for it. It is more of this like gradual, very boring sort of accumulation of safe moments over time where you realize, oh, I am still here. You are still here, we are happy, we are content, and nothing bad happened. And slowly, very slowly, your nervous system starts to update what it has on file for what healthy love feels like. And this then goes into part 7, which is how to sit with being chosen without automatically sort of looking for the catch. Because this is the last thing that I want to talk about today, because it's like, practically, how do you do this? Because I think we can talk about all this stuff at like a very conceptual level, but at the end of the day, when you were lying in your bed, ruminating on this fact, thinking about the guy that has been nothing but lovely to you, and you were still somehow convinced that something is wrong, like, what do you actually do with that? The first thing I would say is to just name what is happening, like actually out loud or in a journal, or just like consciously in your head. Be like, okay, I'm doing the thing where I'm looking for the catch. I'm doing the thing where I'm trying to create distance because this is starting to feel a little bit too real. Like, just naming it takes a lot of the power out of it, because it sort of just like separates you from the feeling. Like, you are not hypervigilance, you are a person experiencing hypervigilance. The second thing is to ask yourself, like, is this actually something wrong, or am I just like creating the chaos in my life? Like, am I just in unfamiliar territory? Like, is there a genuine reason to be concerned here, or am I just not used to things going so smoothly? And I think if you were honest with yourself, like, majority of the time, it's like the second one. Like, there is no actual evidence. You are just not used to things feeling this easy. And then the third thing, which I think is the most important, is to come back to what is actually true about who you are. Because Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4 says, he chose us before the foundation of the world. Before you did anything to earn it, before you performed or proved yourself or made yourself as small as possible to be lovable, you were already chosen. God saw the world and he was like, you know what? It would be better if I personally added you into it. And so the idea that like love has to be earned, that you have to like work for it or shrink for it or suffer for it, that is not the truth of who you are and why you were made. You were brought into this world because it pleased God. He was happy and joyful creating you. So just remind yourself that this is a wound that just has not healed yet. And that any love that requires you to earn it is not reflecting your true worth back to you. And so just to come back to right now, just ask yourself, right now, is this person treating you well? Right now, are you happy? Right now, is this safe? If the answer is yes, then that is actually more than enough information to just survive today. You do not need to like future project and like solve the next 5 years with this person. You just need to decide whether you just want to keep showing up. And that is a decision you can make like one day at a time. But if the answer is no, that there is genuine evidence that this person is not loving you the way that God intended for you to be loved, then that is something to reflect on, to journal about, to pray about, and then make a grounded, informed decision about what you're going to do. And I just want to say this before I go. If any of this resonated with you, if you heard yourself in any of this, please be gentle with yourself about it. Like, genuinely, because these patterns, although your responsibility, they're not your fault. You did not choose to learn love the way that you have learnt it. You were a child navigating what was in front of you with the tools that you had. And you survived it. You got here. And the fact that you were watching this, that you were asking yourselves these questions, that you were trying to understand yourself more deeply, that is not nothing, okay? That is everything. Breaking a pattern is not a one-time decision. Like, it is a daily practice. It is catching yourself, naming it, choosing differently, and doing it again the next day and the day after that. And slowly, very slowly, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. The safety starts to feel like home because you start to feel safe with yourself and you stop being drawn to people who were never right for you. Not because you forced yourself into wanting something different, but because you genuinely healed the parts of you that needed chaos in the first place to feel safe. That is the work, and it is so, so worth it. And I love you guys very much. Make sure to comment if anything actually resonated with you. And I love you guys very much. Make sure to subscribe and like, because I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so we can monetize the channel. That would be such a fun little milestone. But again, I love you all so much. I'm so glad you're here, and I will see you in the next one.